So I'm just going to quickly introduce everyone, and then we'll just launch right into the topic at hand. We'll start first to my left. We have Steve Posiask, President and CEO of the American Consumer Institute. For over 35 years, Mr. Posiask has been involved in consumer public policy research. He's published numerous economic studies, done work for EPI and policy studies for numerous independent nonprofit organizations. Many of his studies have focused on the consequences of public policies on consumer welfare. And we also have Pierce Myers, Executive Vice President and Counsel of the Parcel Shippers Association. He's held a variety of positions in the private sector and the federal legislative and executive branches, serving as advisor and counsel on postal and governmental policy matters. And last but not least, we have David Vernon, Vice President and Senior Analyst at Sanford Bernstein. He's a senior analyst covering air freight and surface transportation and U.S. airlines. Before that, he was a senior executive at several leading international transportation companies. And I should say had done just absolutely incredible analytical work on this space. And, I've had the fortune to come across some of snippets of his work, and it's really well done. And so we're pleased to have him, and we're pleased to be joined by our panel here. And so this panel is going to be more focused on the Parcel Select program. I think the last panel was a little bit more wide-ranging, and I think let's just dive right in. Is the Postal Service getting a good deal on the Parcel Select program? And we'll start with Steve.
Oh, well, okay. So if you look at it very high level, you can see that the Postal Service, of course, is losing a lot of money. No question about it. It's just it's the sort of a quarter-to-quarter issue. We see deteriorated service quality, serious systematic problems that are going on away. And again, high level, if you look at it, the first-class domestic mail is collecting by about $2.16 for every dollar of revenue. So that's in terms of its attributable cost. So it would appear that the first-class side is not necessarily the problem. So the question is, where are we having these losses? And there certainly are some other regulated services that have low or no margins, and we just don't know what's going on the competitive side. And of course we heard from the last discussion a little bit about the problems with transparency that we have, and what it really raises, I think, is a question of until we can look at that in a little bit more detail, there's a high likelihood that these losses may in fact be present in the or just simply low margins are present on the competitive side. What that does is it invites a lot of strange activities, the potential for affiliated transactions that are abusive. It raises the possibility where you have dominant services that are essentially shifting profits and revenues to competitive services. It raises the possibility that competitive services are shifting cost and risk to dominant ones. And we just don't know because, of course, these are negotiated contracts and they're not subject to public disclosure. But what it calls for is sort of a deeper look into this. And what I did, do I have a moment just to get a little bit into this? So one thing I did do is I went to the books and I looked at like the fiscal year 17 data at page 73, and I saw that the competitive services contributed about 1.7. It's actually 1.698 billion towards the institutional, the fixed costs. And if you go to page 68, you'll see that the denominator, the revenues, are approximately 20.689. What that means is that competitive services are paying about 8 cents for every dollar of revenue, whereas your dominant services are paying 58 cents per dollar of revenue. That's a huge inequity, and it raises a concern, as I refer to as these, the potential for affiliate transaction abuse, that you have these competitive services propping up the dominant services. And again, we don't know until we really open this up and take a look at it. But that's what it appears. And when we're looking at the readjustment to the price cap, all that will do is it'll affect the prices on those services, those first-class domestic mail that appear to be profitable, as I started. And if that's the case, then what we're doing is we're fixing the wrong thing. If we got rid of the dominant services altogether, I mean, who would provide those services? On the other hand, if we got rid of all the competitive services, yeah, we could have Peapod deliver food. We could have a bank, do money orders. We could have UPS deliver packages. The bottom line is what we're doing is it would appear that there's a subsidy going on that's benefiting these competitive services, and all at the risk of the dominant monopoly services. And my position is, well, let's get back to the core mission of what this is supposed to be, and let's get the prices right. We want the Postal Service to be successful, and in order to do that is we need to get the prices correct. And we can't do that right now. And I think there does need to be, I think it was raised at the last panel again, the term was oversight, that has some responsibility for looking into this. Those are just that's my opening salvo.
And your point is kind of an extrapolation on like a big red flag and how they're doing their accounting.
Well,
effectively.
Yeah. So it would take you back to, well, what did the electric utilities do? What did the the telephone sector do? The local exchange carriers and those sorts of things. I mean, I filed total factor productivity studies with the FCC. They're on the record with the state commissions and that sort of thing. And there were specific affiliate transaction rules in place that required that. That you have your competitive services pay at least the matching contribution, if not more, or sometimes they use the word the market rate. And I don't know if that's happening. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying we need to have that information. And without that information, how can the Postal Service run its business properly? And how can the Regulatory Commission provide the oversight it needs?
I want to come back to this utility model. Let's hear from Pierce next.
Yeah, I think we probably have joined the discussion here. Steve is absolutely correct that we don't know what's going on with these. I'm talking competitive products now, Parcel Select, that sort of thing, which is what Steve was talking about. We don't really know what's going on these individual negotiated service agreements. We do know that before a negotiated service agreement can be for competitive products can be entered into, the Postal Service and its partner that it's trying to contact would have to take that agreement to the Postal Regulatory Commission and satisfy the Postal Regulatory Commission that product is going to be, I'll say profitable because that's the term we're using, but the idea of profit in the postal accounting gets kind of confusing. It has to make a contribution to profit. It has to cover its attributable costs. And I think Mike mentioned earlier that we could have a very, very long discussion on what costs are attributable. I don't think that's what we're here to do today. I pity the people in the next panel who may have to get into that. I've been litigating a case on this for 3 years, and we did support what the PRC had done with regard to how they will attribute costs for both market dominant and competitive products in a challenge brought by the United Parcel Service. And 10 days ago, but we closed that one out in the DC Circuit, where the PRC's position was upheld, contrary to what UPS wanted in that particular case. Extremely complicated, but let's just accept the way they do it for the time being today. And Steve's 8-cent figure caught my eye actually about 2 years ago when it showed up in a PRC filing. I tried to track it down. The idea that for every dollar of costs on a competitive product, you get a return of 8 cents to pay for the institutional cost. So I tried to track it down, and I got your piece right here, Steve. And I think this is a very complicated area. I think what happened here was when you were figuring your numerator, rather than take the actual contribution to institutional costs, which the competitive services made in FY97, and that's here in the CRA that you were referring to, which is about $7.1 billion. Your footnote says you have a numerator of $1.698 billion at page 73. And what that was the minimum contribution that the Postal Service is required to make, 5.5% of all institutional costs. The actual contribution that resulted from the ground parcel product was, as I said, $7.1 billion, which of course dramatically higher. So it's a bit more than 8 cents. And as a matter of fact, because we were kind of concerned about who's paying what in terms of postal costs, I did pull from the same cost and revenue analysis the cost coverages, which will tell you how much is being returned in terms of contribution for the various products. I think you had first-class mail at $2.16, and in the CRA it's at $2.10. It is by far the most profitable. And by the way, the bulk of that is the pre-sorted first-class mail. The single-piece first-class mail returns a much lower contribution. Marketing mail, which is the old standard mail, is at 152. I'm not going to use the periodicals number because it's embarrassing. Parcel Select is at 175. Competitive products at a whole are at 149. That's right at about the same level as all the marketing mail. And let's see, market dominant products overall is 166. And for the whole postal system, the average, the cost coverage for all products is 163. So the competitive products are doing quite well. They still return a little bit less per dollar of cost than market dominant products overall. That's 166 to 149. But the 8-cent figure, I can see how you would have that understanding. As a matter of fact, the Citigroup analysis that kind of got regurgitated here in a tweet by a well-known American citizen, talking about the Postal Service should have to charge. It was only the $1.50 figure. They had the same misunderstanding. They were looking at the minimum contribution required by law and regulation of the Postal Regulatory Commission that the Postal Service must achieve in order to offer competitive products. And that's the 5.5%, when in fact the real contribution was somewhere up in around 23% and growing. So I think we're doing all right on these agreements. Now, we can't track back and look at the famous one now is Amazon, because they're confidential. And we can't track back and look at any contracts that DHL has with its clients either, because they're confidential. But with regard to the Postal Service overall, there's enough data out there on the record, it's very transparent, that you can see that the Amazon contract, the UPS contract, the FedEx contract, those 3 contracts for Parcel Select probably amount for about 70% of all the revenue that the Postal Service produces, at least according to anecdotal articles I've seen. And as a result, you know, they got to be up there. They got to be pretty profitable, or at least they have to be making a pretty good contribution, not to abuse the profitability term. It's just mathematically, it's impossible for them not to be. So that's my take on the NSAs and the the value of Parcel Select. Now, the value of Parcel Select is this: to the Postal Service, and this is really important. To the Postal Service, it's extremely important because it's growing, and the contribution that it's making to the overall institutional costs of the Postal Service is growing. It's been growing dramatically. And that is being used to offset some of the reduction in contribution that's coming from the market-dominant products. So more and more market-dominant products are becoming dependent on the competitive products. The competitive products certainly benefit from the Postal Service offering market-dominant products. This is your first-class mail, your periodicals, your marketing mail, because they get to share that same network. When the carrier drives out to park his truck and get out and deliver the mail, he's carrying all those products. They all get to share that cost. That's a real advantage for the competitive side on the Postal Service. But more and more, the fact that the competitive side is returning more and more in terms of contribution, larger and larger amount of contribution, that is helping offset some of the decline in the market-dominant revenue. And what we like to say at the Parcel Shippers Association, you know, is we want to keep the mailbag full, because that benefits everybody. And then the value is to the consumer, who's going to get one more competitor in the parcel delivery market, which, as you know, is a very, very competitive market.
So I think that's a great way to transition to David, and love to hear what you think about. Again, the question is the Postal Service getting a good deal on Parcel Select, and how we should think about that. I think also just for our audience, this term competitive product is used a lot, but the Parcel Select program is effectively access to a last mile monopoly network. So, I think it does make sense that you would want to, when you have the monopoly, that's where you're going to be making the money. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. And it's just confusing. I think people get confused that, the last mile seemingly, remembering what exactly is going on there. But David, would love to get your thoughts.
Sure. So I guess I would be of the view that on balance, the Parcel Select package, as it's grown and over the course of the last several years, has turned into a little bit more of an anchor on USPS profitability than it has been a tailwind. And there's really kind of 2 points to our argument. The first would be that there's simply just too much Parcel Select. And the second would be that the pricing is just all wrong. When you think about the example that my co-panelist here just mentioned, you've got the guy walking up the street. He's got an extra package. The first package you put on a mail route was incredibly profitable. It was free. There was no extra cost to that package. By the time you give that guy 100 packages or 200 packages, you have to take his mail route and divide it into 2 mail routes. So you start adding work hours. And when you look at the post office today, they have more work hours today than they had 5 years ago. A lot less mail and a lot more packages. That productivity headwind is what creates the profitability headwind. And there's really, really no way to get ahead of that without price, because packages are, by definition, a lot less productive than mail. If you separate it out and look at a UPS guy's route versus a postal carrier's route, a postal carrier's route for letters is fixed. He goes out to every address, he opens the box, puts stuff in, takes stuff out. A parcel carrier route is dynamic. They're totally different in terms of the way you structure a route. And I think what's happening within the post office is you're just adding a lot of incremental variable costs that's offsetting whatever you thought was your contribution based on these regressions that you did in your costing model, based on a business mix that you no longer have. So you're always going to be sort of chasing the past. You're just going to be chasing this myth of sunk cost in your route design. You're going to continue to adding volume variable hours to bring this volume on. And this is not a unique issue amongst any parcel carrier. If you look at UPS, you look at FedEx, they've all had the same problem. Post office, the growth of e-commerce is a lot of volume. We'll take volume, we'll make money on it, but then you keep adding routes, you keep adding labor, you don't make any money on it, so you have to take the price up. A second point in our argument is really around pricing. And I have no doubt that the PRC is absolutely correct in reviewing every contract and looking at it and seeing that it fits the letter of the law, that it looks like it's profitable on whatever contribution number that came out of the costing system. But I think from a policy perspective, the idea that the post office should make pricing decisions on competitive products like Parcel Select, like a competitive business, is completely flawed. It is not the profit maximizing behavior of a monopolist to price to marginal cost. If it were, there'd be rail tracks everywhere because the marginal cost of a railroad is really, really low. The profit maximizing behavior of a monopolist when they were offering competitive products is to price to the cost of the replacement option. And this is what was the key to the successful deregulation of the railroad industry. This is why the railroads right today are probably one of the most successful deregulatory experiments in modern economic history. They price to the cost of their replacement option. And what the post office should be doing, in my view, with Parcel Select would be to price to the cost at which it would take a competitor to put on a route, not the cost of filling up space on their route, because then they just keep adding routes and keep adding cost and keep adding capital requirements. The cost of what it would take anybody else to come in and put on a route. Then they're going to be able to maximize the profitability of that type of business, maximize the contribution over to mail. So in our view, I think that on balance, the Parcel Select program has grown to the point where there's just simply too much of it, and there's just not a good enough price on it.
That's a really interesting point. I agree with you completely that the Postal Service should price to the market and should make as much money as it possibly can on Parcel Select. I don't know, well, let's take a step back. I mean, since they've been able to negotiate prices and were given pricing freedom, the prices for competitive products as a whole has gone up 88%. That's from 2007 to 2018. Market dominant products, which are tied to the CPI, have gone up a little bit over 21%. So, I mean, I think they are trying to take price, and I think actually they're doing a better job than I probably thought they might, because they weren't equipped for this. I mean, they were a regulated industry forever, and they're still learning, you know. But at some point, they're going to start losing volume because of price. They're going to hit that point where competition. You know, we're really relying on the market to control the upside of the Postal Service pricing.
That's a great question. I mean, I was buying a book the other day, and you know, I'm looking at the prices, and you know, book's shipping from New Jersey to DC, small book, as a hardcover. Price for Postal Service was $2.50 for shipping. Price for UPS Parcel Select was $2.65 or something like that, like 10 cents more maybe. And the next price was UPS or FedEx or something. It was $8. So there seems to be a little bit of a gap between where the pricing is and where it could be. What, David, in your mind, how much could that price go up and not really change the competitive dynamics, not really change the not really encourage entry and things like that?
So, I mean, look, I think encouraging entry, not encouraging entry, if you're going to be in a competitive business, you got to be ready for a little bit of entry. So I do think, you know, as you're thinking about comparing a price for a Parcel Select product versus a price for a UPS Ground or whoever else, there's going to be a transit difference. There's going to be a reliability difference. So they're not exactly apples for apples. So I would think in the Parcel Select, which is predominantly the destination delivery, truly last mile kind of business, what you'd want to look at and say is, in a given market, what would a individual who's going to start a private enterprise with the cost of capital that is available in the private marketplace, what would it cost them to run that business at a reasonable rate of return, right? So you'd go and talk to a bunch of regional parcel companies, which I've done across the country, and you talk to these guys and you'd look at them and say, how much does it actually cost you to run a guy, not on a marginal basis a couple hours a day, but 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, come in every day, the peaks and the valleys of that kind of business. Take the labor rates, take the average productivity rates, look at what it is, and look at what it would cost them with a rate of return. That price to me looks somewhere between $3 and $3.50, not the $2 that the post office would charge. And if you turn that question on its head for a second and ask, why is UPS and FedEx taking all this volume and giving it to the post office? Forget about UPS for a second because they're a Teamster. Look at FedEx Ground. FedEx Ground hires contractors to get paid exactly the same as the USPS city carrier assistant. They have the same labor cost, yet they still push volume over to the post office. Why? Because they're cheaper. They're subsidizing it relative to the cost that they can produce at. Any nickel that they price below what FedEx Ground has to pay just to stay in business without a return is profit that the post office could easily be making. And they would be smaller in small package, but they'd have a heck of a lot more contribution. And then they'd be in a better position to minimize the rate of first-class mail increase, which is a totally separate, ridiculous situation in our point of view, but down the road.
I have to be really careful because my members are shippers, and if I'm up here arguing for higher prices for Parcel Select, which I just did, I may be looking for another job. I agree with you. I mean, in theory, my members don't listen to me, that they should be charging, whatever they can get for their Parcel Select product. I don't know why you would use this replacement mechanism argument for determining what a price ought to be. I mean, the price ought to be what they can price it at and increase their overall profitability. And when they start losing volume, then we'll see if they priced it too high. And if you look at what's going on, one of our members here showed me the trend in Parcel Select volume over the last 4 years, and it's like this. No, wait a minute. This is anybody remember you all remember J. Edgar Hoover? Okay, he was famous for saying trying to make lemonade out of lemons, that the increase in the rate of crime is decreasing, okay? Well, the increase in the price increases for Parcel Select is the rate of price increase for Parcel Select is decreasing. So the average price increases per year is going down like this. At the same time, the actual prices charges are going up. So they may be getting to the point where they're getting up to that price point that you're trying to create another mechanism for them to try and determine. We're going to see over time how that all plays out.
So just to kind of come back to you on that one point around why replacement cost is so vital. There's been a lot of research done on this that the economists, the economics behind it, it's called Ramsey pricing, right? As a monopolist, you want to be pricing up to that cost of a replacement service, not to your cost. Because if you price to your marginal cost, what you're going to have to do is keep plowing capital in and building more and more and more capacity. But if you price up to a replacement cost, that a competitor who has to access the capital markets at that cost and doesn't earn a return, so he won't do it, that's going to be your profit maximizing point. And that's pretty well established in economic theory.
We've written about that, and That happens in roaming, right? I think with I think we're railroads. AT&T roaming costs with these are regulated typically to some degree, but there's some sense of reasonableness, I think. So Steve,
I think the Ramsey pricing though is acceptable in competitive markets. But what we have here is a situation where you have two different sides. Sure. And so it's not clear if you have money leaking out the other side if Ramsey pricing is actually the correct social price. But just to make another point though, in terms of maybe prices are a little bit lower, just keep in mind that if you go back to the regulator and you can justify that you're covering your sort of your average cost, your variable costs, what you're really trying to do is say, hey, look, these costs that are subject or attributable to or direct to my service prices. These are the kinds of things that I'm covering, and therefore, with $1 more or something like that, I'm demonstrating that it's going to contribute something towards, the overheads, or somehow it's going to be profitable. That's a kind of a backward way of trying to get into there. That really what they're doing is what they're demonstrating is, at least in the short run, that it's profitable. The problem is that while in competitive industry, as if firms will certainly stay in business as long as they cover their average cost to produce, but longer term, they're out of business. That you have to cover those fixed costs entirely. And so, and to your point about, no, you don't price at marginal cost, particularly in a high cost industry. You don't do that. And so that's why I'm saying that this raises a little bit of suspicion when you see the prices are a bit low. And maybe the solution is to price higher to maximize, and I get that's the rational thing to do within within the Postal Service. But But as a regulator looking around and saying, well, wait a minute, to what extent are we going to be raising the price cap on our monopoly services? And we have a situation on this side.
The mail service monopoly services they regulate that rate, but not on the
Right.
parcel
Well,
select program.
the
It's
market
not.
regulates the competitive product side, but this isn't I don't think we're going to, I hope
No,
we're
we
not
don't
gonna
need to
get-
go down
get-
that
I don't
road.
wanna get
No,
into
no.
the price cap situation.
But
This is
just one,
actually- yeah, go ahead.
just one last point, though. I didn't use a 5.5% in calculating anything. They came out of a page 73 and not page 3. But I'll just leave it at that.
I'm kind of interested in just thinking about this, how the Postal Service describes these programs, and if that's really the way a business would think about it. And I'm interested to get everyone's views. Obviously, you've done a lot of work with EPI, and so a lot of the language that the Postal Service uses is that they're getting UPS and Amazon to do their work for them, to pre-sort the mail, and what you see is this very odd sort of sorting facilities popping up from Amazon all over the country, right next to a postal service a facility, and they're doing the same exact work, right? And the Postal Service is so excited about that because they don't have to pay their own workers, right? They can sort of benefit from this sort of lower wage worker. And I feel like if I did that to my business, if I just plopped down a bunch of freelance reporters right next to my reporters, I don't think they'd be very happy about that. And so, how is that like how is that thought of as sort of like, I think of that as kind of undermining the integrity of the network, right? Potentially. And so why does that how does that evolve, and how do you guys think about that? I'm interested in your views
First
in
of all, could I
particular.
just mention something to Steve, because he made a really important point here. When I remember I put the profitability in quotes, and he made the point that you can be profitable on all your products short term and still go broke in the long term, and that's true. And we have to watch out for that. And that's why I threw out those numbers that showed you the coverage for all mail, all postal services was, I think, 166, and the coverage for market dominant was 163, 166 for the market dominant products, and 149 for the competitive. So they're squeezing up together to where they're all making relatively the same contribution. You have just kind of opened the door to one of the dirty little secrets about privatization in the Postal Service, and that's that since 1970, when work sharing really took off, a whole heck of a lot of the Postal Service's business has been privatized through work sharing. And it started with letters, where they started sorting first-class letters, first-class mail, which is a huge operation now. And it really reduces the cost for the Postal Service, and it's you can call it, it's not really contracting out, but it's outsourcing work sharing. And that's all that the DDU delivery is. That's what the last mile is. It's really an upstream privatization where the private sector competes to get the product to the Postal Service for the last mile. I am a big proponent of kind of upstream privatization because I think the private sector is a lot more nimble. If they want to close a plant, they don't have to worry about the senator from Missouri. They don't have a 200-year bureaucratic history in most cases, which is an inertia that is very, very hard to overcome. I've written papers on how to privatize the upstream. I think you're right on. That's where it needs to go. But that last mile that we have there, which has been there forever, and which is really kind of a crown jewel, where we have a universal delivery network that goes there 6 days a week now because Congress requires it to go 6 days a week. That's something that ought to be open to everybody on a non-discriminatory basis, so that you can take in our case your packages from your shippers, your Lands End, your LL Beans, whatever, sort them at these sorting centers, Teddy, and then get them to the Postal Service, and that's really a kind of backdoor privatization, and it's probably the way to go.
I guess I would add work sharing's good. in general, right? When these programs were started in the 70s, and I've been looking at this for some time, and I'm a little older than I look, but probably don't have as much experience with some of the people in this room. But when you created these programs, the idea was, look, we have these really high cost letter carriers, and they have to go to every house. Let's let everybody else do all the other stuff, sort the stuff, give it to us, and we'll just go to every house, and we can do that more productively because we have to do it, and that's a really good sort of trade-off. As it started to extend into the parcels, and Airborne was one of the early commercial pioneers in here, and DHL kind of bought that and turned it into Global Mail, and then FedEx sort of got around, and UPS was a little bit slower because of the Teamster contract, and then you had Amazon come in and really, really exploit the program in a way that, maybe when you were designing WorkShare, if you look at when I've read through the documents around that the GAOs put about postal work sharing, it says the general idea of this is that if we I'll create these programs, we'll get more mail and it'll be good, right? With Parcel, it's not clear that more volume is good. And it's not clear for any commercial carrier anywhere that the growth of e-commerce right now as a parcel delivery business is good. It's good revenue, but maybe not so great profit. And the challenge with it is because that structure of a parcel route is very different, it comes with a lot of variable cost. And as you're starting to add a bunch of routes into your business, that variable cost you're adding can come at a higher than average variable cost that you've had in the past. And you start to get behind on that productivity, and you end up adding volume, adding routes, adding cost. You thought you were going to make a bunch of money, and you didn't. So I think with the way that Parcel Select and the work sharing is going around these commercial products for parcels, I don't know that the original intent around Parcel Select was to get more mail, to get more packages for the guys to deliver, because too many packages is not the same as more mail. More mail is easy to fit in the mailbag. More packages, pretty soon it doesn't fit in the Lockheed Martin 24-year-old mail truck, right? So there's just simply too much of it. And it's a loophole that Amazon's very, very creatively pushed, and at some point, the post office is either going to choke on that volume, and I understand there are some issues around service. They're not able to invest. We're at that point now, and to the extent that the volume growth is going to slow, I think it's fascinating to think about the fact that rate of Parcel Select price increase has been really, really high, and yet they're still growing 20% a year. That shouldn't happen.
So I want to get back to this about the Amazon deal and whether that's a good deal specifically. But first, I just want to ask Steve: should it be part of a public interest analysis at the Postal Service that should the Postal Service worker, and we'll get to this in the next panel, be asked as part of the analysis of these programs? Is their interest part of a public interest analysis? When you're, or should it be? We've been reporting on this for a couple of years. It doesn't seem.
You mean the postal worker?
The postal worker.
Restate that. How do you?
So, for example, you're at a sorting facility at the Postal Service. You have benefits and pay. The worker at the Amazon facility right next door is paid less and has worse benefits. Is that part of the analysis? Does it deserve to be part of the analysis?
I think it definitely plays some of the qualitative aspect of it. I mean, we're all going to be sensitive to that, I think. But honestly, in the end, it comes down to efficiency and driving down per unit cost and providing the right incentives to do that. Unfortunately, that's kind of the way that in the end it's going to be how the economics works out.
And the other point I would say is just that's interesting is if the Postal Service has a sustainable business model, they can actually afford to pay its workers. But I want to get back to this other question about Amazon. Specifically, because this idea that they're exploiting this loophole is interesting. I mean, a lot of times when you get into this conversation about parcels, there's a weird, you ask a lot of different people, and sometimes they'll talk about post office working as a business. Sometimes you'll talk about them as a universal service. And so, I think what's confusing is if there's some kind of universal service obligation, that there should be you know, affordable packages delivered in a timely way to everyone across the country, that seems like different from like having Amazon do it all, right? That would be, you would go about creating a program a little bit differently than the one that we currently have. And so I'm interested in learning more about like why you think that specifically Amazon's kind of going through a loophole there, or how otherwise Postal Service could think about designing a program.
So I don't know if it's necessarily a loophole. It's a program that's there. And I wouldn't also say that the infrastructure and the facilities and the capacity that the post office would have are redundant with whatever Amazon's putting up next door. Because Amazon's doing a lot more parcel sorting, and the mail does a lot of mail sorting. Right? The post office at one point, back in the early 2000s, was looking at outsourcing their entire parcel handling distribution system because they're not very good at it. Right? They're pretty good at sorting mail. Right, but packages, particularly when they get bigger, there's different physical handling requirements. There's different material information systems. There's different handling systems. There's different everything. And I don't know that necessarily, when you look on a straight pay basis, that the workers that Amazon would be hiring would be any cheaper than the city carrier assistants that the post office is hiring. So I do think it is a complementary set of infrastructure that they've invested in to leverage this low-cost delivery option, which puts them at a significant advantage relative to other retailers, because other retailers don't have that
The
capacity. and
CCAs
don't have
were
the ability.
designed to, address Amazon's interests, though.
Pretty much.
Yeah. The city carrier assistance, the lower benefit paid workers.
But
at
if
the
you
Postal
work up
Service.
that city carrier assistant sort of pay rate to an hourly fee with the cost of a truck and everything else, and work it at an average level of productivity in the parcel business, you don't come out at $2 a piece.
One thing
You
we
come
do
out to
know-
$3.50.
One thing
Right.
we do know is that as we shifted more and more, of these parcels and things of that, the whole business has shifted at this point, to like package delivery and that sort of thing. But what we see here is that the financials have not improved. Now look at I think it was last quarter, the statistics coming out of the USPS showed that the weight being transported between the competitive services accounted for 45%. So if you think about these, boxes coming through, certainly not as heavy as if they were full of mail. So the chances are, if that's the weight, probably this more than half or half of the truck now is filled with these boxes. There is plans to build out a new CapEx program to buy specific trucks that will cost over $6 billion over the next 7 years. And these trucks are designed to deliver what? Packages. This is a package business, and to a large extent. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, why isn't this business making money? And so it kind of gets to your point about, well, maybe some costs need to be raised, but the regulatory solution here is to raise the price cap, which would affect those first-class services that appear to be more profitable, if that's a real word.
I don't think they need to raise the regulated rates. This is the
No.
negotiated service agreement. Amazon, according to their contract that's available publicly, has their agreement coming up towards the end of the year. So these are negotiated individually, the rates.
Right.
The Parcel Select program has a rate, though, so they would have to, if they wanted to address that there. I want to open things up for questions. I think we have a few minutes for questions for people.
David, I can't barely see you, but I appreciate your well-studied analysis and whatnot in this cost. But there are two things I would suggest we think about. One is if the Postal Service, and don't answer this yet, but if the Postal Service were not carrying the parcels or raised the rates such that Amazon, well, I think there's probably flex there as flexibility as Pierce has said, and maybe they can get some more. But there's at some point we have to acknowledge that if you try to raise the rates too high on Amazon, what are they going to do? They're going to do it themselves. And people say, how can they do that? Well, 5 years ago, nobody believed they would be doing what they're doing because they were using FedEx and UPS. And they figured out how to do it, and they do it more efficiently. Then they develop their regional sortation. They take over that. They use Flex. They use drones. They use whatever they have to do. And for years and years, everybody said, well, gee, they're silly. They can't. They don't make money. They don't make money. How can they exist? So they don't need to make money. They're what, $1 trillion company almost. So the first thing I would say is there's a point where the Postal Service, even though they're not making a lot of money on parcels and remember Amazon, what do you do if you don't make any? Okay, they're like 51% of the volume now, I think. The second point, the other point I want to make is, and I don't, and you're a transportation analyst and whatnot, when you come down to the cost, it's all about the cost per delivery, is it not? And as long as the Postal Service has high revenue coming from other products, they're getting per stop $5, $6, $7, $8, not $3, not $2. And as long as they can have more revenue per stop, and if they get it from FedEx and UPS and they get the mail, I mean, I'm not an economist. Doesn't that make sense? And that, the way to, and if you have a universal service obligation, as we do today, and they have to do this 6 days a week, and they got to go to these households or cluster boxes, doesn't it make sense that they try to get all the revenue they can, and then according to, and still cover their margins through NSAs and whatnot?
Well, I mean, to answer your point question on the second point, no.
Why?
Because if you take on more revenue, you take on more volume. You take on more volume instead of spending $6
Yeah,
billion
but I said
on trucks,
it's
you gotta spend
profitable
$7 billion
volume.
on
It's
trucks.
profitable volume according to
he's saying
according
it's
to the
not.
NSA.
But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the way that that's set up, right? If this is all profitable, right? They've added $4 billion over the last couple of years of shipping revenue, and if the contribution on that shipping revenue is truly as high as my colleague can look at the cost data and infer, then there's a bigger problem here, which is that the controllable income for the business continues to get worse. And yet all this high contribution growth is coming in. That means the decline from first class mail is a lot worse than maybe we're thinking. There's simply no way to grow your way into profitability with this stuff.
Well,
And
if
there's
you
two things
continue to
about
cut
it, right?
your costs on the front end,
But that's the
and
second
all you
thing,
all you
yeah.
do is that final mile,
There-
and you keep first class mail as long as you can. The other alternative is you just go out of business. Is
So
it not?
if you keep adding volume, does your cost come down or does it go up? That's primarily the question that you need to ask yourself.
Well, it depends on the pricing.
No, it does. It actually.
No, the costs will go up. I mean,
Costs
the
go
costs
up.
will
Oh, yeah,
up.
costs
The
will go
question
up.
is
Like the
whether
universal-
your pricing,
Yeah.
you're going to reach a point where you might lose money on too
Listen,
much volume. I
The
get that.
sooner you get to the point where you know what the market will bear, then you can start building plans for a capital plan. You don't want to go out with a subsidized price and then go raise a bunch of capital to go buy a bunch of trucks for volume that you may not be able to economically serve.
Yeah, well,
So I
clearly
don't
parcels-
think that that's
You know-
a really good broader business strategy. And the other thing that I would say on this whole issue of cost is costs are going up for everyone. There's no economies of scale in parcel delivery. Anybody thinks that there's economies of scale in the final mile delivery business has never driven a truck. It's a guy driving in circles, right? And he drives in circles and he drops off packages and he gets back in. And every year he comes in and he wants a raise. So you got a huge number of guys that are operating at max productivity and they have inflationary pricing. And that's why your cost goes up. And if you look at what Amazon's doing, their costs are going up even faster than the post offices. Their costs, right?
Oh, absolutely. And they're not making any money on shipping. We all know that.
Well, they're raising the rates on shipping by 19% for their fulfillment by Amazon customers because they have such inflationary cost pressure. What's happened with this whole growth of e-commerce so far is that it's been largely subsidized. It's been subsidized by the post office, it's been subsidized by UPS, it's been subsidized by Amazon.
Right.
Because everybody wants to get the biggest share of the wallet during this generational shift of consumer buying preference from going to a store to going to going online. But delivering the next decade of e-commerce is going to be absolutely impossible at this rate structure.
I
There aren't
want
enough people.
to. I want to ask. I want to follow up with a question about this. So if e-commerce as we currently know it has been subsidized, okay. First of all, and the U.S. Postal Service is is part of that.
Where are you getting this? Where are you
I'm just
getting that
taking the
it's been
words that are
subsidized?
coming out of David's mouth. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like he just said that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
It's been
if
subsidized by
this is
Amazon and
true, if
everybody
this is
else,
true, right, then you know, I guess I have a question about where, so we have been enjoying this sort of subsidized e-commerce. I guess I have two questions. One is where do you think it becomes a sort of like in terms of price, and how do things stabilize in terms of like where's the sort of natural price and delivery time, I think, for e-commerce in the long run? Like, where is it going to end up? Is it going to be a luxury product, or is it going to just be subsidized forever, or be less of a everyday thing?
I mean, I think the cost pressure on from the transportation component of e-commerce is there. It's real. Everybody's facing it, and the rates for final mile delivery are going to go up. The cost of your next e-commerce delivery 10 years from now will be higher than it is today.
No,
But I think if you look
Yeah.
at like retail as a percentage of, or e-commerce as a percentage of retail, 5, 10, 15, whatever number you want to think of it as being, there's a lot of stuff in there that shouldn't be delivered to a house at the cost that's being paid.
So this
So
guy
the
brings
price
up
is going to
another.
go up, and then it goes away,
This-
or you go to a store.
This
It's not that
so
hard.
the going to the store is the question that I have. Is the normal retailer, again, and I know this may be unpopular, but this seems like something the president is interested in. To the extent that the Postal Service is subsidizing e-commerce, that would be to the detriment of the typical retailer. And so, is that not a legitimate policy question for the Postal Service, which it has to make its decisions on the public interest? Should they maybe be interviewing people to learn if they are A, subsidizing the e-commerce industry, and B, whether or not that has an impact on a typical retailer?
So I don't think you need to make it a company-specific thing. I think you can say that the transportation industry has subsidized this growth. You look at UPS, their volumes are higher, their margins are lower. You look at FedEx Ground, their volumes are higher and their margins are lower. All this e-commerce growth is driving a productivity headwind that when you put a bunch of volume in front of a transportation company, they get really excited and have fantasies about the high incremental margins and contribution that they're going to get from this traffic. And then it comes across the dock and they realize they have to start hiring people, and it never kind of pans out. And then you start to raise pricing on it. So we're in this inflection period here. Do I think that the implications on broader retail, and look, there's going to be a lot of changes in retail 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? People will still be buying and delivering stuff online. More groceries will be bought online and either picked up at a local sort of drive-through pickup location as opposed to being brought inside your house. There's going to be a lot of shifts in that. I would think, just as a taxpayer, that there is some issue around. There's more truth in the argument that there's a subsidy issue from the post office on large shippers, and that includes to UPS and to FedEx and everybody else, than there is not, and that they should be charging more for that privilege, because every city carrier assistant they hire and every new route that they have to put on is added fixed cost and obligation that we're all going to have to pay for as the growth of e-commerce starts to change a little bit, as Amazon maybe insources more of its volume. There's going to be some real risk of sunk costs in the post office by expanding to meet this delivery need at a below market price.
The other side, you said that the cost of the delivery people is going up, but hear a lot that Amazon can just start, have its own last mile delivery network, and you look at the Flex program. Yeah. Is the Flex program really a sustainable way to? It really is. Is that like a real threat? I mean, that Amazon actually could realistically, in a way that its investors would be okay with, get into the last mile business. I mean, there's a price point for everything, but
I mean, you could look at the availability of the gig economy and see that there's an army of people out there that could deliver all this volume at a much lower marginal cost. The problem is finding them all to be available at the time you need them.
Well, you got the WalMarts and you got the Best Buys and you got other brick and mortars now that are getting into the last mile.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, you keep using Amazon, but it's really not just Amazon. I mean, a lot of the big box stores are getting into this, or the curbside pickup stuff. I just picked up something on my way to the airport at Best Buy.
But
You know,
when you think about like just crowdsourcing itself, right? You can get a lot of people to be around to deliver packages on a Saturday and a Sunday, right? They are oversubscribed in people that want to deliver packages on a Saturday and a Sunday. There's nobody to deliver packages for Flex on a Tuesday at 3. You've already gotten everybody off the couch that doesn't have a job, and the next guys that you're going to take off the couch are going to be a lot less productive than the first 1,000 guys you got off the couch, as far as an incentive. So it's a good marginal source of capacity. It's not a sustainable business. It's not a sustainable threat to a scheduled delivery network.
that leads to another concern I hear expressed a lot, and it's capacity in the delivery sector. I mean, we're talking like, you know, no problem, but the shippers are worried about it. And particularly when, you know, we started getting into October, November, December. But there's a real concern about capacity right now in terms of,
that's
delivery.
That's also a really good question. If you are a business, right? If you're operating like a business, it seems like UPS and FedEx are looking at ways to limit their exposure to Amazon in particular around the holidays. But the Postal Service doesn't seem to be, taking that same type of problem into account. Is that something that, you know, that crunch at the holiday time, that capacity issue, is that something that, you know, the should be part of the, obviously it gets into this cost issue, but how much of a role does that play in that cost question?
I'm not sure I completely understand you, but all of these carriers have to be ready to gear up for the holiday season. Some of them have gotten some pretty bad ink here in the last couple of years. Not last year. Last year was a pretty good year. And it's a difficult thing to forecast. It's a difficult thing to plan for. And when we get to the labor market like we have it right now, and, you know, when you can't even hire people to staff the fulfillment centers, it's an issue. Yeah, it's an issue that everybody has to be concerned about. All the carriers have to be concerned about. Get big black eyes if you don't deliver by the right holiday.
It's delivering packages to a house is and has always been a low productivity affair, right? If you grew up in the 50s and the local dairy farm brought the milk by with a person, it was expensive. But the efficiencies of mass manufacturing milk at a production farm weren't there because the production farms weren't built, so it was a cheaper way to get you the product. Right now, when you think about this having somebody walk around and deliver your stuff to your house, it's by definition low productivity and it's expensive. We all want to do more of it. We're going to have to pay more for it, and the rates for these delivery services are going to have to go up. And the sooner that the post office acts a little bit more rationally, in my humble point of view, around the parcel select pricing and is really pricing less at what they perceive their variable cost to be for delivering the next piece, and the more they price at what the cost it would take someone else to create a real economic for-hire business, the sooner those rates will start to go up and you'll be able to attract more labor into it and the growth will happen.
Yeah, right. So rates have to go up is what you're saying, and so what I'm what I'm saying is we really don't even know what some of these rates are, right? So the
Parcel Select rates.
Right. So but you know, we don't know what
We just don't know the details
that,
of the deals.
And into that regard, you know, we have a regulated side that may, in fact, their services may be propping up these other prices and taking advantage of a number of benefits that a separate subsidiary would not be able to do. Just things about the logo, the brand, the website, using the employees, just pulling up to the mailbox is a $20 million subsidy. Some will say. So there are real advantages to using the existing network, and so I think in the end you have to make sure that the price and the wholesale price is fair, and the way to do that I think is to try to limit affiliate transaction abuse, and there's a number of ways that telecommunications and other electric utilities had done this in the past. They had specific staff. When I was chief economist at Bell Atlantic, we had specific staff dedicated towards making sure that this abuse wouldn't, the rule essentially is competitive entities must pay higher or either the prevailing market price or fully allocated price. That's in almost every contract that you have out there between these electric utilities who do other things. So it's kind of play between the two. But I mean, I completely agree with, your assessment and your risk. And I think what you're saying in terms of the direction of the pricing I mean, I see that too, and I think there was another good point that was made at the end of the last panel, that in the end, some of this will have to be opening up a whole can of worms on the universal service in order to solve this problem, because you know, if we do hit that inflection point and we start to see volumes dropping off on this other end of the business, what do? Can you still deliver 6 days a week on the regulated side?
Do we have any other questions? Oh, we got one over here.
You're kind of throwing, I know this from the industry, I've worked with a lot of people doing this sort of stuff, but you're throwing letter and packages all in the same truck. Then you're trying to figure out, can you deliver 5 days a week? Can you deliver 3 days a week? Can you deliver 6 days a week? Why, and you also said that the parcel delivery is more random around in an area than, and you're making all these trucks carry all these packages. Why hasn't the post office done like so many other industries in the logistics industry and actually allocated trucks to just package delivery and deliver them 6 days a week, 5 days a week, or whatever is profitable, and then turned around and taken the mail delivery and continue to do like it is? By keeping those two separate, you could then allocate your costs accordingly to what's happening, set up your terms separately to what you're delivering, and be able to make a profit off of having the whole thing all together.
Well, I mean, I think there is this whole notion of the shared cost, right? If you take a guy who's delivering mail in a market and you give him one package, that package is effectively free. You give him 100 packages or 200 packages, he can't do it all in the shift, and he's got to go reload, so his productivity comes down. So there is a value, I guess, of being able to deliver some volume with on a letter route. So if you totally separated that out, you'd lose that efficiency on the trunking, the efficiency on all the getting the product into the market. There'd be a big challenge for that. And if you were to do that, that's kind of the way I think they should think about pricing. If they priced to the cost of driving just the postal trucks around on a Sunday, for example, when they don't deliver mail, it's inconceivable to me that if you look at the average rate realized per parcel select of $2 or $2.15, that on average, they're covering their variable cost on Sunday delivery. They're probably thinking that they're going to do it to get all the volume during the week where they get all that great contribution. But you really want to be thinking about that as a separable business when you think about pricing policy. Because if you do that, then yes, you may have less volume, but you'll have the amount of volume that can fit in the mail routes that you have, and you won't have added capital requirements to go buy a whole bunch of new trucks, and we'll be in a lot better shape from an overall perspective.
And it gives you the flexibility of getting rid of what doesn't work.
Well, a couple of things. The Sunday delivery are dedicated routes, and the Postal Service does run some dedicated routes if they have sufficient package volumes. But for the most part, in the state of play today is everybody's better off if you share the trucks. And if you took the package business out of the competitive product business and separated it out from the letter and flat business, what you're going to lose about $7 billion additional in contribution that the market dominant side would have to pick up. I mean, letter and flat prices would go through the roof. You'd lose revenue, yeah, but the cost you shed would be far less than the revenue you're losing. So the result is you're out $7 billion that you were, we call it profit, whatever you want to call it, contribution from the competitive side. But they do use some of those separate dedicated routes. But as long as you got one truck going out there and it can carry it can carry all these different types of mail, why not share? And that is an advantage that the Postal Service has. It's an advantage of scale and scope that it has over others. And there are extremely elaborate and just excruciating models and measurements to ensure that those costs are, to the extent they can be shown to be caused by one product or another, that they're charged to the right product. I mean, God, this is excruciating stuff. And it is done. As a matter of fact, that's what that D.C. Circuit case was all about. UPS said, hey, you aren't doing it right. They challenged it at the Postal Regulatory Commission. This case went on for 2 years. And the D.C. Circuit just said, okay, PRC, you're doing it okay. Continue to attribute costs the way you are. So that's where we are.
And what it means is that most of the costs don't get attributed.
Yeah, I think hiding behind the complexity of it is in my experience not the right thing. I have experience with money losing parcel operations, having been on the board at DHL Express during a heck of a fun time after they screwed up the airborne integration. You know, the fear is always that if you pull a little bit away, the whole shredder is going to unravel. And the reality of the situation is a lot more. It's actually a lot simpler than that. If you just look at the financial results of the controllable income of the post office, it keeps getting worse. Mail keeps going down at a slow rate, and packages are growing at a high rate. If the packages were very contributory, then that implies that the decline in first-class mail is getting worse, which would be really, really alarming, given the slowing growth rate in package. So what I think the issue is when you start to get bogged down in all the cost accounting stuff is that whatever's coming out of the regression models isn't accurate for what it's going to be in the future. You've got a bunch of historical data that you can look at that says this is my variable cost to stop a mail truck. If that's all based off of the last 40 years when you had more mail in year 40 and less mail in year 39, then more package. So as the mix changes, you're not going to get the right view of what that incremental cost is going to be. And I think I would argue you'd be hard pressed to find any correspondence between what the average perception of variable cost is in the postal costing systems with what is actually realized from a year-to-year basis. Otherwise, the profitability wouldn't be as bad as it is.
I want to wrap up the panel, but I have one last question for David, which is in your opinion the central analytical problem at the Postal Service that they're when it comes to parcel business, that they're too focused on volume and not enough on the reality of the economics of the parcel delivery?
I mean, I think the goal setting thing is important, as we kind of kicked off the day with. We're like, what are we asking the post office to do? If we're just asking the post office to recover whatever they think variable costs would be, we're going to buy more than $6 billion worth of trucks, because those numbers look really, really attractive. And we can just buy more trucks and get more package volume, but we'll still continue to lose a ton of money. So I think that the approach the post office is taking in terms of what they're trying to do with small package right now is very, very similar to what they would do with mail. Just get more volume because it's going to be high contribution. But the reality is, and this is true, and you can look at it in the publicly available companies as well as other mail services, even the German post office is now having problems in their mail division around parcel, that the variable cost is more than we think it is. And that's where the real problem is. So I think what you need to be asking the post office to do with small package is to maximize whatever profit you can on whatever routes you need to meet whatever the demand for mail is. And if you really wanted to do a more holistic sort of review of what's wrong with the post office, you'd have to go back and look at that price of a stamp. Because while we never want to touch that because of all the political pressure and the pain that would come from changing the CPI price limit on the price of a stamp, the fact of the matter is, for 50 some odd cents, you can send a letter from New York to Oregon. The price of sending a letter from the bottom of England to the top of England is like 90 cents. England fits inside of Oregon. There's a real cost problem with thinking that the price of a letter across the continent should be 50 cents. It sort of boggles the mind. So you got to think about more things like, pricing on a distance basis, pricing to some true economic cost as opposed to this like free CPI capped price stamp. And yeah, maybe there'd be less mail volume, but then you figure out how much packages you can fit in there at whatever the market will bear. And then, hopefully we won't all have to bail out the healthcare plans of the postal workers for the next 20 years.
Well, this has been a really, really interesting panel, so please give our panelists a round of applause.